The windshield blurred with water as I stood on the porch of the house I grew up in, clutching a wrinkled envelope stuffed with cash. My mother Vera opened the door just wide enough to see me, her face already twisted into that familiar sneer I'd known my whole life. "You still begging, Amira," she said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Mrs. Kowalski across the street pretended to water her already soaked garden. "Maybe if you'd done something useful with your life, you wouldn't be such a failure." She snatched the envelope from my hands and tossed it into the muddy flower bed beside the steps. Bills scattered across the wet dirt like broken promises. "You'll never be successful," she continued, her voice sharp as broken glass. "You fix junk cars. You are junk." My throat tightened. I wanted to scream, to defend myself, to tell her about the 3 jobs I worked just to scrape together that rent money. Instead, I whispered the only words I could manage. "I just needed help, Mom." Her laugh was cold and hollow. "Help yourself." The door slammed in my face hard enough to rattle the frame. I stood there in the downpour, watching my money turn to pulp in the mud, while neighbors whispered behind their curtains. "My name is Amira, and I build things with my hands. Things most people would have thrown away years ago. That's what I do. That's who I am." The morning after my mother slammed that door, I woke up in my cramped studio apartment above the laundromat on 5th Street. The ceiling had water stains that looked like continents. My alarm clock was an old engine timer I'd rigged to buzz at 5:30 every morning. I splashed cold water on my face because the hot water hadn't worked in weeks, pulled on my father's old work coveralls that were 2 sizes too big, and walked the 4 blocks to my workshop. It wasn't much. A corrugated metal shed near the railway tracks that rattled every time a freight train passed. Oil stains covered the concrete floor like abstract paintings. Tools hung on rusty hooks I'd salvaged from a construction site dumpster. But it was mine. Every wrench, every socket, every drop of sweat that fell onto that floor belonged to me. That morning, I had a delivery truck waiting. The driver couldn't afford a real mechanic, so he'd come to me. I crawled under the chassis while he apologized for not having enough money. "Pay me when you can," I told him, my voice echoing against the undercarriage. "Just drive safe." Growing up in that house was like living under a storm cloud that only rained on me. My older brother Dimitri could do no wrong. Vera would brag to anyone who'd listen about his business degree, his corporate job, his expensive suits. At dinner, she'd heap his plate with extra food while sliding mine across the table like she was feeding a stray dog. "No one respects a girl who smells like grease," she'd say, wrinkling her nose whenever I came home from helping Dad in his garage. Our father would try to defend me, his voice gentle but tired. "She's got talent, Vera. Real skill." But Mom would wave him off like he was swatting at flies. "Talent doesn't pay bills. She needs to marry someone successful, not waste her life playing with car parts." I was 14 when I first realized she actually meant it. That she genuinely believed I was worthless. We were at a school event where I'd won 3rd place in a regional engineering competition. I'd designed a water filtration system from recycled materials. Dimitri wasn't even there, but Mom spent the whole evening talking about his promotion. When the teacher congratulated her on having such a talented daughter, she smiled tightly and said, "Oh, this is just a phase." I stopped trying to make her proud after that. Dad got sick when I was 17. Lung cancer. The doctors said it came from years of breathing in chemical fumes from paint and solvents in his garage. He never complained, not once. Even when the treatments made him so weak he could barely lift a socket wrench, he'd still shuffle out to the garage to watch me work. One afternoon, about a week before he died, I was sitting beside his hospital bed. Machines beeped steadily in the background, marking time like a metronome. He reached into the pocket of his robe and pulled out a small wrench. It was old, worn smooth from decades of use, with his initials carved into the handle. "You have magic in your hands, my girl," he whispered, pressing it into my palm. His skin felt like tissue paper. "Fix things. Build things. And never let the world convince you you're broken. I closed my fingers around that wrench and promised I wouldn't. Vera stood in the doorway watching us, her arms crossed over her chest. She should hear the truth, she said coldly. That dream won't feed her. It won't pay rent. It won't give her a life. Dad just smiled at me and squeezed my hand. It'll give her something better, he said. Purpose. He died 3 days later. The funeral was small. Dad didn't have many friends left. Most of them had died before him or moved away. Vera wore black but no tears. She spent most of the service checking her phone and whispering to Dmitri about selling the garage. I sat in the front row clutching that wrench in my pocket, trying not to scream. Afterward, at the house, Vera pulled me aside into the kitchen. Her voice was businesslike, clinical. Your father left the garage to both of us, she said. But I'm selling it. The land's worth more than that rusty shack, and I need the money. I felt something crack inside my chest. You can't. That was his life's work. That's where I learned everything. She laughed. The same cold, hollow laugh from the porch years later. Exactly. It's a tomb, Amira. Time to move on. I asked if I could buy her out, even though I had exactly $243 in my bank account. She laughed harder. With what money? Face it. You're not cut out for this. Within a month, she'd sold the property to a developer. They tore down Dad's garage and built a storage facility. I wasn't allowed to keep anything except the tools I could carry. I took what I could fit in 2 duffel bags and left. I found a crumbling shed near the market district. It had been a newspaper distribution center back in the 80s before everything went digital. The owner wanted $300 a month, which was more than I could afford, but I convinced him to let me work off part of the rent by fixing his delivery van. The space was barely bigger than a 2-car garage. The roof leaked in 4 places. Mice nested in the corners. The electrical wiring was so old it sparked when I plugged in my tools. But it had a rolling door and room for a car lift I bought at auction for $50. I spent 2 weeks cleaning it out, patching holes, setting up my equipment. My first customer was a produce vendor whose truck had died in the parking lot. He'd already been quoted $900 at the dealership. I fixed it for $80 and a bag of apples. Word spread slowly. The old ladies from the church brought me their ancient sedans. Factory workers came by after their shifts with grinding transmissions and dying batteries. None of them had much money, so I charged what they could afford. Sometimes that meant cash. Sometimes it meant groceries. Once, a baker paid me in bread for an entire month. People in the neighborhood started calling me the grease angel. It wasn't a real business. It was survival. Tomas showed up on a Tuesday evening in October. The sky was threatening more storms. I was closing up the shop, pulling down the rolling door, when I heard footsteps behind me. Excuse me, miss? The voice was rough but kind. I turned to find an old man standing in the alley, leaning heavily on a wooden cane. His coat had seen better days. His shoes had holes in them. But his eyes were sharp, alert, alive. He held out a rusted carburetor like it was a wounded bird. Can you fix this? I took it from him, turning it over in my hands. The thing was ancient, probably from a tractor built in the 60s. This is older than both of us, I said, smiling. He grinned back. So am I. Something about him felt different. Safe. Like talking to my father again. Come back tomorrow afternoon, I told him. I'll see what I can do. He nodded slowly. What do I owe you? I shook my head. Let's see if I can fix it first. That night I stayed up until 3 in the morning taking apart that carburetor, cleaning every valve and spring, replacing what couldn't be saved, rebuilding what could. When he came back the next day, it gleamed like new. Your smile's enough, I said when he tried to pay. He studied me for a long moment, like he was memorizing my face. What's your name? Amira. I'm Tomasz, he said. Then he walked away, whistling. Tomasz became a regular visitor after that. He'd show up every few days, always in the evening, always with a story about machines that changed the world. He told me about the first assembly line, the invention of fuel injection, the engineers who built engines that could run for 1,000,000 miles. He never asked for anything. He'd just sit on an overturned crate near the door and watch me work, offering advice when I got stuck. Try loosening that bolt from the other side, he'd suggest. Or, that seal's backwards. Flip it. He was always right. Between customers, I'd pour him tea from my thermos, and we'd talk about everything except the obvious fact that he was homeless. I knew because I'd seen him sleeping near the train station on cold nights. But he never mentioned it, and I never asked. Instead, I made sure there was always extra food. Sandwiches I'd claim I couldn't finish. Soup I'd say I made too much of. He'd accept with quiet dignity and change the subject. One evening, he watched me repair a toy car for a little girl whose father couldn't afford to buy her a new one. Why do you fix things people throw away? He asked softly. I thought about it while I soldered a tiny wheel back onto the axle. Because someone has to believe broken things can still run. Vera showed up unannounced on a Thursday morning 6 months after I'd opened the shop. I was under a sedan, replacing a transmission pan, when I heard her voice cut through the sound of the radio. Still playing mechanic, I see. I rolled out from under the car, wiping grease off my hands. She stood in the doorway wearing a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my rent. Her nose wrinkled as she looked around at the oil-stained floor and rusty tools. This is what you left home for? This dump? I stood up slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't leave home, Mom. You made it clear I wasn't welcome. She waved that away like smoke. Don't be dramatic. Her eyes landed on the old coffee can where I kept cash for emergencies. Before I could stop her, she picked it up and looked inside. All this for dirt work? She counted the bills. Maybe $300. 2 months of saving. Pathetic. I grabbed the can from her hands. You took Dad's garage. This one's mine. She laughed. That same laugh. Oh, Amira. You think you're building something here? You're just delaying the inevitable. When this fails, and it will, don't come crawling back to me. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. By the way, Dimitri's getting promoted again. VP of Operations. Maybe you should ask him for a job. The door slammed behind her. 3 weeks later, my landlord raised the rent to $500. No explanation. No warning. Just a note slipped under the door. I sat on the floor of my apartment that night, running numbers in a notebook until my head hurt. Between rent, utilities, food, and shop expenses, I was $50 short every month. I'd have to get a 4th job. Maybe night shifts at the gas station. Maybe cleaning offices. I was so tired I couldn't think straight. The next morning at the shop, I tried to focus on fixing a radiator, but my hands were shaking. A bolt slipped from my fingers and rolled under the workbench. I knelt down to find it and just stayed there, forehead pressed against the cold concrete, fighting tears. That's when I heard Tomasz's cane tapping across the floor. You ever think of giving up? He asked quietly. I lifted my head. He was standing there in his worn coat, looking down at me with those sharp, kind eyes. Every muscle in my body wanted to say yes. Yes, I thought about giving up every single day. Every time a customer couldn't pay. Every time my mother's voice echoed in my head telling me I was worthless. Every time I ate instant noodles for dinner because I'd given away my profits. But I shook my head. Every day, I admitted. But I don't. He smiled. Good. A week later, my Uncle Gregor came by with an offer. He was Vera's younger brother, worked in insurance, drove a decent car. He'd always been kinder to me than Mom, but that wasn't saying much. "Your mother's worried about you," he said, though his tone suggested she'd sent him on an errand she didn't want to do herself. "I've got an opening at my office. Filing clerk. Data entry. Minimum wage to start, but it's steady." I was tightening lug nuts on a tire. "That's kind of you, Uncle Gregor, but I'm building something here." He glanced around the shop skeptically. "Building what? Debt?" I set down my impact wrench and wiped my hands on a rag. "Building a life. On my terms." He sighed like I was a child refusing to eat vegetables. "Pride doesn't pay rent, Amira." I met his eyes. "Neither does fear." He left shaking his head. That night, Tomasz brought me a small brass keychain he'd carved himself. It had my name on one side and a tiny wrench on the other. "For the dreamer who doesn't quit," he said simply. I tied it to my toolbox. It's still there. Even now, years later, I look at it whenever things get hard. Whenever I need to remember why I started. Whenever I need to remember what my father said. Fix things. Never let the world convince you you're broken. Tomasz stopped coming in November. One week he was there, telling stories and drinking tea from my thermos. The next week, nothing. I walked down to the train station after closing up one evening, looking for him in the usual spots. The other homeless folks said they hadn't seen him in days. Some thought he'd gone to a shelter. Others thought maybe he'd died. Nobody knew for sure. I searched for 2 weeks. I asked at soup kitchens and churches. I left notes in places I knew he frequented. Nothing. It felt like losing my father all over again. Tomasz had been the only person in months who treated me like I mattered. Who listened without judgment. Who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Then one morning, I found something. I was opening the shop, pulling up the rolling door, when I noticed a small brass key sitting on the ground right at the threshold. It had a paper tag tied to it with string. The handwriting was shaky but clear. "Keep going." I turned the key over in my palm. It didn't fit anything in my shop. I checked every lock, every drawer, every toolbox. Nothing. I put it in my pocket and went back to work, but the weight of it stayed with me all day. A small reminder that someone, somewhere, believed I could make it. Even if I wasn't sure I believed it myself. The storm hit in December. The worst one in 20 years, the news said. Wind howled through the market district like a living thing. The power went out across 3 neighborhoods, including mine. I'd been working late, finishing a brake job that couldn't wait, when water started coming down sideways. It poured through the holes in the roof I'd never quite managed to patch. Within an hour, the floor was flooded. 2 inches became 4. 4 became 6. Tools floated past like toys in a bathtub. My workbench collapsed under the weight of water-soaked wood. Parts I'd spent months organizing scattered across the shop, mixing with mud and debris. I tried to save what I could, but it was useless. Everything was ruined. Everything. I collapsed on the one dry spot left, a concrete step near the back wall, holding my father's wrench in both hands. My whole body shook. Not from cold. From the crushing weight of realizing my mother had been right all along. I was never going to make it. This had all been a stupid, childish dream. Maybe Mom was right, I whispered to the wrench, like my father could somehow hear me. Maybe I should have just given up. I curled up on that step and cried until I had nothing left. Then I fell asleep, still holding that wrench, surrounded by the ruins of everything I'd tried to build. Morning light woke me. My back ached from sleeping on concrete. Water still covered the floor, but lower now, draining slowly through cracks in the foundation. I stood up, stiff and cold, and started wading through the mess to assess the damage. That's when I saw the envelope. It was wedged under the door, white and crisp and completely dry despite the flood. My name was written on the front in elegant script. Inside was a single piece of letterhead from a law firm I'd never heard of. The message was brief. You are invited to apply your craft for a special automotive restoration project. Your skills have been recommended by a trusted colleague. Travel expenses will be covered. Please contact the number below at your earliest convenience. At the bottom, instead of a signature, there were only 2 initials. TK. My heart hammered in my chest. Tomasz Karek. Could it be? I read the letter 3 times, looking for catches, for scams, for anything that might explain this. But it seemed real. The letterhead had watermarks. The phone number had a legitimate area code. That afternoon, once I'd pumped out what water I could, I called from the payphone outside the laundromat. A professional voice answered immediately. Miss Amira. We've been expecting your call. They gave me an address in the capital, 200 miles away. A bus ticket would be waiting for me at the station. I should bring my tools and be prepared to stay for 2 weeks. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. This was either the opportunity of a lifetime or the strangest con I'd ever heard of. The bus ride took 6 hours. I sat in the back, my duffel bag of tools at my feet, watching the countryside roll past. Fields gave way to suburbs, suburbs to city blocks. By the time we pulled into the capital station, the sun was setting behind glass skyscrapers. A driver in a black suit was waiting with a sign that had my name on it. He didn't say much, just loaded my bag into the trunk of a sleek sedan and drove me across town to an industrial district I'd never heard of. We pulled up outside a massive warehouse. The kind with gleaming steel doors and security cameras everywhere. Inside was a garage that made my workshop look like a child's playpen. The floor was spotless white epoxy. Lifts lined both walls, each holding a car worth more than my entire neighborhood. Tools hung in perfect rows on pegboards. Diagnostic computers blinked on rolling carts. A man in an expensive suit approached, hand extended. Miss Amira. Welcome. I'm Henrik, head of operations. I shook his hand, feeling completely out of place in my stained coveralls. He didn't seem to notice or care. Someone recommended you personally, he said, guiding me deeper into the garage. Told us you had a gift for seeing what others miss. He stopped in front of a car covered by a heavy tarp. We need this restored. 2 weeks. Can you do it? He pulled back the tarp. Underneath was a vintage car from the 1950s. Beautiful bones. But rusted, dented, half disassembled. A disaster. I ran my hand along the fender and smiled. Yes. They gave me a corner of the garage, all the tools I needed, and complete freedom. No one questioned my methods. No one stood over my shoulder critiquing my work. For the first time in my life, I had everything I needed to do the job right. I started before dawn and worked past midnight. I stripped the car down to its frame, cataloging every part, every bolt, every wire. The body had rust damage that required welding new panels. The engine was seized from sitting too long. The interior was destroyed by water and time. But underneath all that damage, I could see what it used to be. What it could be again. I slept on a cot in the corner of the garage, too absorbed to bother going to the hotel they'd arranged. Henrik would bring me meals and coffee, checking in with quiet respect. You work like my grandfather did, he said one evening. Like the car has feelings. It does, I replied, not looking up from the carburetor I was rebuilding. Everything does if you pay attention. The other mechanics watched from a distance. At first, I heard whispers. Who was I? Why was I getting this job? But as the days passed and the car took shape, the whispers turned to respect. One of them, an older man named Paolo, came over on day 9. That's museum-quality work, he said quietly. Where'd you train? My father's garage, I told him. And every mistake I've made since. On day 14, I installed the last piece. The restored emblem on the hood. I'd spent 3 hours polishing it until it gleamed like liquid chrome. Then I stepped back and looked at what I'd built. The car was perfect. Better than perfect. The body gleamed deep blue, like the ocean at midnight. Chrome trim caught the light from every angle. I'd reupholstered the interior in cream leather, matching the original specifications exactly. The engine purred like a satisfied cat. Henrik walked in just as I was wiping down the windows one final time. He stopped in his tracks, staring. Other mechanics gathered behind him. Someone whispered a prayer. Is this the same car? Henrik asked quietly. I nodded, too exhausted to speak. He circled it slowly, running his hand along the paint, checking the gaps between panels, peering under the hood. Finally, he turned to me with something like awe in his eyes. The man who sent you here was once our founder, he said. He built this company from nothing. Built it on the belief that good hands should never go unnoticed. He handed me an envelope. Inside was a contract. Permanent position. Full benefits. A salary that made my head spin. And funding to open my own workshop. My own real shop. With proper equipment and space and everything I'd ever dreamed of. I read it twice to make sure it was real. The founder, I said slowly. Tomáš Carrick? Henrik smiled. He's been watching you for a long time, Miss Amira. They gave me a folder that night. Documentation about Tomáš. About his life, his company, his philosophy. Tomáš Carrick had started as a factory worker in the capital 60 years ago. Worked his way up from sweeping floors to lead engineer. Eventually started his own automotive company built on innovation and ethics. He'd become wealthy beyond imagination, but he never forgot where he came from. Every year, he'd go out into the world disguised as a homeless man. He'd watch. Listen. Look for people with talent and integrity. People the world had overlooked. Then he'd help them. Quietly. Anonymously. He'd funded dozens of businesses, sent hundreds of kids to college, saved entire communities from economic collapse. All without ever taking credit. The folder included a handwritten note addressed to me. Dear Amira. I watched you fix things people threw away. I watched you give your last dollar to someone who needed it more. I watched you choose kindness over bitterness, even when the world gave you every reason to be bitter. That's rarer than talent. That's character. The world needs more people like you building things. So I'm giving you the tools to build bigger. Don't let anyone convince you you're not enough. Especially yourself. TK. I sat on the edge of that cot in the corner of the garage, crying harder than I'd cried in the flood. But this time, it wasn't grief. It was relief. Someone had seen me. Really seen me. Not as a failure or a charity case. As someone worth investing in. 6 months later, I opened my own automotive school. The Carrick Foundation for Mechanics and Makers. Tomáš had provided the building, a renovated factory on the east side of the capital. 3 bays for training. Classrooms for theory. A parts library stocked with everything students might need. I hired Paulo as head instructor. Together, we built a curriculum that focused not just on technical skills but on the mindset my father had taught me. Fix what's broken. See value where others see junk. Build things that last. We offered the program for free to anyone who wanted to learn. Single mothers. Former inmates. Homeless kids aging out of foster care. Anyone who'd been told they weren't good enough. Within a year, we had 50 students. Within 2 years, 100. Our graduates went on to open their own shops, work for major manufacturers, teach others. We installed a brass plaque above the main entrance. It had my father's words engraved in simple letters. Fix what's broken. Every morning, I'd touch it on my way in. Every evening, I'd touch it on my way out. A reminder of where I'd come from. A promise about where I was going. Vera called once during those first few months. Left a voicemail asking if the rumors about my school were true. I never called back. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just busy building something she'd never understand. The award came in my third year. The National Innovation Council recognized our work with their Excellence in Education Prize. They invited me to accept it at a gala in the capital. I almost didn't go. Fancy events weren't my style. But Henrik convinced me. Let people see what you've built, he said. So I went. Wore a simple black dress. Left my hair down. Stood backstage feeling completely out of place while politicians and business leaders gave speeches. Then they called my name. I walked onto that stage in front of 500 people and accepted a crystal trophy that caught the spotlight like a prism. The presenter asked me to say a few words. I hadn't prepared anything. But I looked out at the audience and spoke from the heart. I learned to fix things from my father. He taught me that broken doesn't mean worthless. He taught me that someone has to believe in what everyone else throws away. This award isn't mine. It belongs to every person who's been told they're not good enough. To everyone who keeps building even when the world says quit. To anyone who's ever been called junk. My voice cracked on that last word. The audience stood. I saw Henrik in the third row, applauding. Saw Paolo beside him, wiping his eyes. That night, the local news ran a story about the school. About me. The mechanic who refused to quit. The next morning, Vera saw it. I know because my phone rang at 7 in the morning. She didn't leave a message. 2 weeks after the award ceremony, I sent Vera a letter. Just a simple note on school letterhead. Mom. I know things between us haven't been good for a long time. But I'd like you to come visit the workshop. See what I've built. No pressure. Just an invitation. Amira. I mailed it and tried not to think about it. Tried not to hope for too much. 3 days later, my phone rang. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Amira. Vera's voice. Cold. Cautious. I got your letter. And? I asked carefully. A long pause. Where is this school of yours? I gave her the address. She hung up without saying goodbye. But 2 days later, a black sedan pulled up outside the foundation. I watched from the second-floor window as Vera got out, looking around like she'd landed on another planet. She wore a tailored jacket and heels too expensive for walking. Her expression was guarded. I met her in the lobby. We stood there awkwardly, not hugging, not even shaking hands. Just looking at each other across a distance that had nothing to do with space. Well, she said finally. Show me. I took her through the whole building. Showed her the training bays where students were rebuilding engines. The classrooms where Paolo taught diagnostic theory. The parts library. The success wall covered with photos of graduates. She didn't say much. Just looked. Touched tools occasionally. Read plaques. When we reached my office, she stopped at the doorway. Stared at the framed photograph on my desk. Me and Dad in his garage when I was 10, both covered in grease, both smiling. You kept that, she said quietly. Of course. After the tour, I took Vera outside to the parking lot behind the building. 7 cars sat there in various states of restoration. Student projects. But in the far corner, under a heavy canvas cover, was something else. I led her over to it, my heart pounding. I want to show you something, I said. I pulled back the cover slowly, revealing it inch by inch. The car underneath was a classic convertible from the 1960s. The exact year and model Vera used to dream about when I was a kid. I remembered her clipping pictures from magazines, talking about how someday she'd own one. How she'd drive it with the top down and feel free. She'd never gotten it. Never even come close. But I had. I'd spent 6 months building it from a rusted frame I'd found at a salvage yard. Restored every bolt. Repainted it the exact shade of pearl white she'd described. Reupholstered the interior in red leather. Made it perfect. "This one's for you," I said softly. Vera just stared. Her hand came up to her mouth. "You bought my car," she whispered. I shook my head. "No, Mom. I built it." She moved closer, running her fingers along the hood like she was afraid it might disappear. Her reflection shimmered in the glossy paint. "I don't understand," she said. "Why would you do this? After everything?" I took a breath. "Because I wanted to show you that I made it. Not in spite of you. Not to prove you wrong. Just because I believed I could." Vera was silent for a long time. She walked around the car slowly, taking in every detail. The chrome. The interior. The engine visible beneath the raised hood. Finally, she turned to face me. Her eyes were wet. I'd never seen my mother cry. Not at Dad's funeral. Not once in my entire life. "I don't deserve this," she said, her voice barely audible. I wanted to agree. Wanted to say all the things I'd held inside for years. All the hurt. All the anger. All the nights I'd cried myself to sleep wondering why my own mother hated me. But standing there in that parking lot, with the car gleaming between us like a bridge, I realized something. Holding on to all that pain hadn't made me stronger. It had just made me heavy. "You said I'd never make it," I said quietly. "You were right. Until I stopped trying to prove you wrong and started proving myself right." Vera's face crumpled. "I was cruel to you." "Yes. I don't know why. You were so much like your father. It scared me. How much you believed in things that couldn't be measured or sold. How you cared more about fixing things than making money. I thought if I was hard enough, you'd want something different. Something safer." I let those words settle between us. "I never needed you to protect me from my dreams, Mom. I needed you to believe in them." She nodded slowly. Wiped her eyes. "Can I?" She gestured toward the car. "Can I drive it?" I handed her the keys. We drove through the old neighborhood. Vera behind the wheel, me in the passenger seat, the top down, wind tangling our hair. We didn't talk much. Just drove past the house I grew up in. Past the lot where Dad's garage used to stand. Past the church where we buried him. Past the market where I'd first opened my workshop. Everything looked smaller now. Less important. The places that had once defined my entire world were just buildings. Just streets. Just memories. Vera pulled over near the park where I used to play as a kid. She turned off the engine and sat there gripping the steering wheel. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Your father would have loved this." "He taught me everything," I said. "I know." She looked at me. Really looked at me. Maybe for the first time in years. "You were always enough, Amira. I just couldn't see it. I was too busy worrying about what other people would think. Too busy trying to make you into something you weren't." "I'm sorry." I felt something crack open in my chest. Not breaking. Opening. Letting light in. "Thank you," I said. We sat there until the sun started setting, painting the sky gold and pink. Then we drove back to the foundation in comfortable silence. When we arrived, Vera got out slowly, reluctant to leave the car. Keep it, I said. It's yours. You once dreamed of this car. I dream of peace. She looked at me. Then at the car. Then back at me. Finally, she nodded. I'll take care of it. I know you will. I watched her drive away, the convertible disappearing down the street. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. That was 3 years ago. Vera and I talk now. Not often. Not about deep things. But she calls sometimes. Asks how the school's doing. Tells me about places she's driven in the car. It's not a perfect relationship. Maybe it never will be. But it's honest. And honest is enough. The foundation keeps growing. We've trained over 300 students now. Opened a second location. Started a scholarship program. Tomasz visited once, finally revealing himself after all those years. He walked through the bays with that same wooden cane, watching students work with quiet pride. Before he left, he pressed something into my palm. The brass key I'd found after the storm. It was never for a lock, he said. It was for remembering. That even when everything falls apart, you still have the key to rebuild. I keep it on my desk now, next to the photo of me and Dad. Some days are still hard. Some days I still hear Vera's old voice in my head telling me I'm not good enough. But then I look around at what I've built. At the students learning. At the cars being restored. At all the broken things becoming whole again. And I remember what my father said. Fix what's broken. Never let the world convince you you're broken. She said I'd never be successful. But success isn't revenge. It's the silence that follows when kindness finally speaks for itself.